atomic gigantification was a sweeping Japan nation when along came a dude with an ultra attitude, a Kamen Rider who's the greatest kicker of Japan. And of all, man, life's too short now, baby, to not talk big now, baby.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Kaiju Conversation. I'm your host, Elijah, and joining me, as always, my lovely co-host and editor.
Hello, I'm Rex.
So, Rex, we're at episode 96.
Terrifying.
But what's more terrifying than that is the fact that in episode 95, we made a minor goof up.
Oh?
So, unfortunately, we had a bit of a weird production schedule on that episode, and it ended up making my audio sound like Garbo. So, I just wanted to bring up that real quick and apologize for the lacking audio quality there. Hopefully, that has been fixed.
In the second half of the episode.
Yeah. I don't know what happened. I suspect that Zencastr was recording through my laptop and not my microphone. But that being said, yes, we are back at it again. Episode 96.
And we're once again coming at you from the past, given this episode is recorded a little bit in advance.
Not as bad as it typically is, but you are correct. We're a little behind here, so we are now in the month of July. Spoiler alert, we do have a themed month for you guys, but that theme...
And spoiler alert, for us, it's secretly June right now.
I'm still a year younger than I actually am by the time this recording comes out. This actually... So, funny story. Next episode, I will literally turn a year older on recording.
Damn.
So, like, I was born at 4 a.m, and that's when we record. So, like...
No way. Kaiju Conversation birthday special.
It could be. I don't know what you have planned. And if I remember correctly, the next episode we're recording isn't really that, birthday special-y.
Hey, it's still a movie. I assume it's one you like. I don't really know.
It is a movie. Yes,
I've never seen it before.
But we're not here to talk about next week. We're here to talk about this week. So yeah, we do have a themed month. No spoilers yet. You won't know it until mid-month.
I mean, it's pretty obvious what the theme is if you've stuck with us.
Well, this will be the first episode, so they won't know what the theme is.
Not the exact theme, I suppose, but, you know.
Close enough. But it is July, which means G-Fest is right around the corner.
Not for me.
Yeah, you don't get to come.
What the hell, man? What the hell?
Look, I tried to convince you to do it, and you just didn't do it, so it didn't happen.
What do you mean you tried to convince me to do it and... I want to go to G-Fest. I've never been.
Then come.
I will.
When?
Hopefully next year. We'll see about that.
It better be next year.
I want it to be.
But we are here to do a couple of things. But before we really dive into our film discourse, Rex, how have you been, man?
Pretty good. Yeah, not much time has really passed since the last episode, so I really haven't done a whole lot recently. I did finally the other day finish off editing for the Godzilla short animation I was doing that I'm pretty sure I mentioned it last episode.
How'd that go?
It's nice to be finally done with it. It's really nice. And honestly, it turned out for a first full-on Blender project, I actually think it turned out fairly all right. There's a couple things that I really wish I could fix, but just because of some frustrating things in Blender, mainly due to me being stupid. Yeah, I can't really fix some of them, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I'm still fairly happy with how the end result turned out.
Good.
It was a learning experience.
So what was your favorite thing you did about it?
Like, favorite shot I did, or?
Yeah, so will it be live by the time this episode goes out?
It should be. If not, it'd be like right around the corner. I think it will be live.
Okay.
I think it will be live.
So, Rex, we were gonna have this conversation before the recording, but I had an interruption by a fire alarm. So it's very obvious that you're pulling the cinematography from -1.
That wasn't intentional.
Are you sure? I got GMK and -1 from it.
Okay, GMK was definitely an influence on like the second
opening.
shot. So, I guess I could see how you get GMK influence from the first shot too. But like there's a shot in my animation, the second shot. It's like you're under like this building and you see through like double framing Godzilla's feet approaching, and then they crash, and then one of them just crashes through the building. That is a very GMK inspired shot. The building is literally modeled after a building from GMK. It doesn't look quite as good though, because I had to remove like a good chunk of the detail to actually make the breakaway work though.
Okay. See, I thought that was influenced by the close-up shot of Godzilla's feet walking from -1.
The way it's animated, I used the shot of him of his feet when he's leaving Ginza after the atomic breath. Like that was the main reference for the actual like way it's animated.
Gotcha.
But the actual idea was just something in my head, and it was kind of like a reversal of that GMK shot because I thought it'd be really cool. And you could definitely notice it in these first two shots is that I think I like double framing. I don't know why, but I really like shots that do like double framing. Double framing, for those who don't know, is like when it's like you've got a shot, say there's like a door frame or a window, and like a big like highlight of the shot is what's through that door or that window. That's what double framing is.
Gotcha. Yeah, see, those shots, I'm personally one who appreciates them. I actually recently, this wasn't for anything like I shot this, I took this kind of video just because I thought it looked cool, but I was at work the other day, and one of my coworkers was sitting like across from me, and I was working on a machine, and I realized that the cutout from the machine actually created a perfect little frame for me. So I'm kind of a sucker for that as well. Rex, I just sent it to you so you can kind of see what I'm
Yeah, I see it.
There's just something about stuff like that that's kind of like really cool, I think.
Yeah. And no, I'm really happy with like those first two shots especially because they turned out like almost exactly how I envisioned them in my head.
Good.
Like the only thing with like the walking shot is I wish I had a better idea on how to use how to actually animate the feet properly because they're not really planted that well. And there is like another small change that I wanted to make, but I just couldn't because of issues with the breakaway part of the building. Just after I'd rendered it, I went back into the project and the breakaway stuff just stopped working.
Oh.
Which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. The setup for it was honestly unbelievably scuffed, so I'm not terribly surprised that it broke.
But no, I enjoyed it. I would love to see more of it.
Good. That's good to hear. Yeah, I've been doing like just yesterday. I was playing around a little more with some animation in Blender, just trying to do like a proper walk cycle for this absolutely beautiful model by a Twitter user known as Moistman. It's like an evolved Godzilla model, and they've got this absolutely beautiful rig for it that makes it like it makes it really nice to animate with, basically.
Gotcha.
So I was having fun with that yesterday. And
see, I'm not an animator. I know nothing about animation. I'm animated. I'm illiterately animated. Animated illiterately. I'm stupid. That's what I am.
Correct.
So outside of the animation you did, is there anything else that you've been able to do in the last it's been a week.
Not too much. Like, I've been out with some friends, just trying to get myself back into the gym. So I was there yesterday. Other than that, not too much interesting off the top of my head, at least.
Gotcha.
How about yourself?
Oh boy. It has been a week. It's been a week. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't been that busy. Well, I've been very busy. But doing a lot of nothing.
Right.
So since our last recording, I got some opinions on my short film premiering at G-Fest, and they've all been very positive, which is very good. I am officially able to announce the panels that I'm doing for G-Fest, which this year I am doing a 50th anniversary for Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I'm doing a 20th anniversary panel on Godzilla Final Wars.
Peak.
I'm going to be on the 1954 70th anniversary Godzilla panel with good friend of the podcast, Danny DiManna, and Nathan Marchand, and more so than that, the one and only Jeffrey Engels. So that's really exciting. For anybody who doesn't know, Jeffrey was kind enough to join me on a Kaiju Conversation Live where we just talked about Japanese cinema and Japanese culture. And it was a really cool conversation. So Jeffrey and I'm pretty excited to be able to meet him in person. I've got my book. I'm going to have him sign it. And I'll probably bring it so he can use it to like show off that he's really cool and has done stuff. But I think the one that's going to be the highlight of my panel list, I'm doing 4 panels, is I'm doing Godzilla -1. I was asked to be on the Godzilla -1 panel. And so I'm going to be on there talking about everything Godzilla -1. So that's all been going on. I've been prepping for that slowly but surely and getting set up and all that. But I've had a major roadblock.
Oh, no.
So not only have I been trying to like work on more of the ninja monsters and prep for G-Fest and like live my life, but I know last recording we talked about how I had just gotten back from vacation and my work schedule had gotten crazy. So imagine that, but like 10 times worse. So I'm recording this a week after our last recording. Since the last recording, I have worked 80 hours at my job.
Jesus.
It actually, I believe once it adds up, I'll know the final numbers actually here in about 5 hours, but it's about 84 hours I worked last week. This last week.
I think I would just drop dead at that point.
Yeah, so it's been one of those...
I don't think I'd be able to make it through that, honestly.
So I averaged about 12 miles a day walking. So if you add up, I walked over 80 miles this week just at work and when I was wearing my watch. So it's been kind of crazy in that regards just because like like the lowest amount of steps I've had is like 12,000, which is still like 3 times the amount of an average American. So I've been running around. I've been working at crazy hours. Like I've had to come in early, stay really late. I've had to come in on my days off. So for me, it's literally been working, occasionally responding to messages, and that's honestly about it. It's been one of those things where I work, I go home, I pass out, I wake up, I throw myself out of bed, I go to work, I come home, repeat. It's been kind of a crazy week. A lot of people have said that I look like I'm like going to lose it. And admittedly, I've been a little like moody.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't realize it, but like I'm getting really like irate. Like I get very like irritable very quickly. And so like I will, as an example, today I went by and I bought some energy drinks before I came here. Somebody asked me for a little bit of information and I like snapped. I was like, don't talk to me. I'm not on the clock. You better not ask me a question while I'm off the clock. And I was like, oh my God, like I was like really rude there. But in the back of my head, I was like, I don't really care. I'm tired. I don't want to be here. I'm not going to work. So I'm ready for another vacation, which I shouldn't be because I literally just got back 2 weeks ago. Yeah, like literally, it's not even been 2 weeks and I'm already like, I want another vacation. So yeah, it's been kind of rough for me. And it's looking like it's going to stay that way up until I go to G-Fest.
Well, hey, at least you've got that to look forward to.
I know. It's just the one thing that kind of is obnoxious is so as I've already, like I have 4 panels. So I have 4 hours of G-Fest that I will be presenting at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I've also got a couple other things I can't really talk about just yet because I'm not allowed to talk about it. I've got a couple other things I'm doing, and I've got the short film. So I have to attend the short film showing and the contest afterwards, or the announcement of the winners.
Right.
So to do all that, I don't get to just sit back and relax. Like it's not a vacation. It's more of a business trip for me. Like I'm going, I'm presenting, I have to prep for those presentations, I have to come up with outlines, do my research, know what I'm going to say. I have to be prepared, like to dress kind of nice for when my short film's shown and the award ceremony after.
Mm-hmm.
I have to look professional for the stuff that I'm doing at the convention. And I'm bringing all of my filming equipment. There's a little hint of what I'm doing. I'm going to be like setting up like green screens and backdrops and cameras and all that. So I'm not going to really have that availability to like sit and do nothing and relax, which is fine. You know, I signed up for the panels. I signed up for the other stuff I'm doing. I made the short film. I'm fine with it. It's just not going to be a vacation, but I'm really hoping that doing this stuff is going to make me feel better and get me into a better spot. Honestly, this just all goes to confirm I need a new job. At the end of the day, I just need a new job.
Yeah.
I need a new job that lets me have Saturdays off so that when we podcast, I'm not exhausted the following day. It's a whole thing.
Right.
So that kind of leads into the next thing that I'm going to bring up. Before you even ask me, Rex, no, I have not watched Tokusatsu. No, I have not watched a single movie. No, I have not watched anything.
I'm dead. I'm so disappointed that I'm just dead.
There was no way I was going to be able to watch anything.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, though, 80 hours, I think I would actually just be dead.
A lot of people were like, how are you still moving? How are you still functioning?
I would be a literal skeleton if I was doing 80 hours. So,
well, what's funny is like this has happened to me before, not at this job, but at every job I've been at for the past like 4 years almost, there is like a week where I'm like the manager. Like I have to answer for things. I have to run things. And I like bust my butt doing it. And then I'm like, I'm ready to move on. I've done enough. I'm moving on. So it wasn't like I'm kind of used to it because I've done it before. Granted, I was still exhausted. Doing 14-hour days is very much exhausting.
Right.
But maybe this is what I need to, I'll finish up. I'll get to G-Fest. I'll do that. And then after that, I'll say, hey, guys, I quit. I'm done. I don't know. I probably won't do that, but it's definitely like a good thing to start thinking of, I think.
Yeah.
Now, as we're talking about Tokusatsu and that I haven't watched any, I'm really hoping you can kind of pick up where I've dropped. Have you watched any Tokusatsu?
Well, no, but I've watched something kind of related-ish.
What does that mean?
Ish. So I recently watched an Adam Wingard movie.
Was it
No, that's
Death
The
Note?
Guest.
Oh.
No, not yet. I watched The Guest. It is probably Wingard's best movie that I've seen. Not that there is a competition. The Guest.
Is this in relation to our discussion about Adam Wingard movies?
What?
You and I had a discussion about like previous MonsterVerse directors' works. Did that inspire you or influence you?
No, I've just been meaning to check out The Guest for a little bit, and I'm like, I could either watch this, or I'm gonna watch like a Park Chan-wook movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I don't think I'm in the mood to pay too much enough attention to like a 2+ hour Park Chan-wook movie. So I'm like, screw it, I'll just put on The Guest. And I actually had a good time with it. Dan Stevens is great. He had to beat off a lot of Americans for that role. Always remember.
So I've heard. So that's all you've been able to watch this week?
Pretty much, yes. What are we covering?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
Man, I've been so busy. I don't even, like...
Well, okay. Let me pitch you this. Let me pitch you something.
Okay.
It's been a while since we've talked about Gamera on the show.
Gamera is really neat.
Any sort of turtle meat.
We love eating Gamera.
So, like, Gamera really hasn't gotten his due. Especially given, like, our first Gamera episode got pushed back, like, 2 years or something.
Yeah, he's been kind of put on ice, to be honest.
Well, he did come from the ice, so I guess it's only fitting.
Yeah, we kind of... I don't know, we kind of had to freeze him. Like, freeze covering Gamera, to be honest.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, life is not all rainbows, and we're not able to do anything really to...
Well, speaking of rainbows, hear me out here. I think
it is Pride Month.
We should finally... For us, yeah, that's true, actually. This is Yeah, so you know what? I think it's perfect. We should cover the next Gamera film. Gamera vs. Barugon.
You mean Daikaiju Keto Gamera Tai Barugon?
Yes, that's the one. Or if it's the English dub, War of the Monsters.
Or Great Monster Duel, Gamera versus Barugon. Yeah, so we could absolutely do that.
I think it's a great idea. And as you said, very unintentionally, very fitting for Pride Month.
Actually,
shame we didn't schedule this episode for June.
Actually, now that you mention it, I think I did watch that today.
Oh, goody, because I did too. And I just neglected to mention it.
Yeah, so before we really dive into the film, I guess we should kind of talk about our history with this one, because we kind of started... I mean, you already brought up how the first Gamera got delayed by like 2 years on our recording schedule and release schedule. And then when we covered it, we were like, this is actually garbage. This is actually
Hey, I didn't hate it. I thought it was Not
It
as
like
good
was
as I
the
remember.
bottom. It was like bottom of our rankings when we covered the X from Outer
Hey,
Space,
X from
Gap
Outer
of the
Space was
Triphibian
worse.
Monster, and
It
was
wasn't
it
as bad
Ibra?
as... No, it was Astro Monster.
Oh yeah,
It was Astro Monster. Look, the first Gamera was at least better than X from Outer Space. That
Yeah,
was a
but
chore.
that was
That was an
because
actual chore.
that one felt like it was literally doing nothing the whole time.
But literally, though.
So it's a little weird because honestly, after rewatching that and my previous rewatches of the Gamera franchise from the show era, I'm kind of not. I'm a little iffy on the Showa era, to be honest at this point, which is weird for me to say because it's like I've only watched.
We're big Showa fans.
Yeah, no,
typically.
like I've watched only Showa Ultraman outside of like a couple movies. I love Showa Godzilla. Like most of my top films are Showa Godzilla films. I love like 60s and 70s tokusatsu. So for me, it's a little weird to know that, like, based off of my recent rewatch of The Giant Monster and my previous rewatch with the Gamera Arrow video set with the commentaries, I was like, these films are not for me.
Right.
So I'm going to be honest. I was a little iffy on putting in Gamera versus Barugon when I started today's development, like production.
See, my worry going into it was not that I was going to dislike the movie. My worry about it was that I was like, what if it's worse than I remember? What if this is actually just going to be really boring?
Kind of like Gamera the Giant Monster.
Yeah, I wouldn't say... I wouldn't quite say Gamera is like super boring because it's not X from Outer Space, but it's just.
But when we both watched it, when we both watched it, we were both like, "Oh, how did this turn into a franchise?" Like we were actually kind of like shell shocked, pardon my pun, of just what we had just watched. I absolutely was.
I don't know. I was just worried that I was going to think a lot less of this film based on the fact that I just did not enjoy Gamera as much rewatching it for that episode.
Right.
So I was worried because prior to this recording, I'd say I went through pretty much my first time watching all of the Showa Gamera films, and really just all the Gamera films in general, with the exception of Guardian of the Universe, and I want to say Gyaos. I had seen like a year prior, I'd seen both of those. My first time actually sitting down and watching all the Gamera films was when I got the Arrow set, except for the fact that I completely forgot to watch Super Monster for like two or 3 years.
You weren't missing anything.
I know I wasn't. I watched it 2 to 3 years later, and it was just as painful as it would have been watching it then. but yeah, so most of these I'd watched them like fairly like close together, all pretty much all for the first time, outside of those two exceptions. And so yeah, from that I realized that out of like the Showa films, this film Barugon was probably my favorite. And then followed by Gamera vs. Gyaos.
Okay, so that's kind of positive.
But I haven't actually. But prior to this, I've only seen prior to this Barugon once.
Gotcha.
Gyaos I'd rewatched because I've seen Gyaos 2, maybe 3 times.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think it might be 3 because of the time that because I'm pretty sure I watched it once before I got the Arrow set.
Okay. So
and then Gamera I've seen about 3 times, 3 or 4.
Gotcha. So should we go ahead and kind of transition here? I mean, we're kind of breezing through this pretty fast, Normally we take a little bit longer, but
I don't mind.
Okay, so
It's good for me.
should we go ahead and start at the beginning where we ended with Gamera the Giant Monster?
Sure.
So
Brief little recap. We're in the kaiju boom. I feel like we've kind of mentioned it enough times in various Godzilla and Gamera episodes to not really have to go like for a full explanation on what the first kaiju boom was. But yeah, by the time of this movie's production, like fully in it, pretty much.
right.
I mean, this movie came out the year of 67, which was the real big year for it, where you get Gap.
No, this came out in 66.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Gauss is 60s. Right. Sorry, getting mixed up.
Yeah, because this one, let me pull it up here. So this one came out.
I was thinking Gamera first one was 66, even though it's 65.
So 1966 was a huge year for kaiju films. And
Yeah.
Barugon and Daimajin were actually kind of the beginning of this, outside of Ultra Q. They Barugon and Daimajin were the first films to come out, I believe, because I don't think The Magic Serpent had came out just yet.
Actually, no, it had come out. It came out like a month prior.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, because it came out on March 5th.
So Toei was, I guess, then the first ones to kick it off in theaters, but followed by Daiei, and then Daiei kind of covered the rest of the year pretty much, because then they did the second Daimajin film in the middle of the year, and then at the end they did the third one when Toho did their movies.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a pretty big year. And the unfortunate part is I think a lot of people kind of forget about just how big 66 was, specifically for Daiei, because of just how big 1967 was, with having every major studio producing something that year.
Right. Yeah. And following the success of the first Gamera, since Daiei wanted to do another kaiju film, though originally they had considered another film titled Space Monster Elegant. Eventually they decided to instead go with a Gamera sequel.
Do you know what Space Monster
ended up?
Do you know what Space Monster Elegant was going to be about?
It was like this, like some sort of meteor crashes in like the plot is basically that like some meteor crashes on like in the sea near Oshima Island, and that spawns like this 20-meter Loch Ness monster type creature. And there's also like a human-sized robot that speaks Japanese, and the aliens responsible were planning to emigrate to Earth, and there was going to be a big rampage with both of the robot and the Elegant monster. But other than that, I don't think there's terribly many details on it. I don't even, if from what I was looking at, I don't think there's actually like an author for the original like idea for it. There's no one actually credited for the idea. But instead, for a following idea that got further in development, Nissan Takahashi, screenwriter of the original Gamera and pretty much all of the Showa Gamera films, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
would develop Gamera vs. the Icemen from Outer Space, where these basically literal Icemen aliens inspired by the Jotun of Nordic mythology would use nuclear weaponry to activate volcanoes and cause the smog to like block sunlight, causing an ice age and attempting to force humans to retreat underground, but failing at that. And eventually Gamera would return to Earth and fight an ice giant and defeat that. There weren't too many other details that I could find on it, but what's interesting is that apparently the ice giant concept would intrigue Daiei enough that even though while the elements of this script would kind of influence the final film, Gamera vs. Barugon, the ice giant concept would eventually evolve into Daimajin.
Right. It's also important to note that Dr.
That's right. Yes,
Kyoko...
the main cast, the main trio from the first Gamera was apparently supposed to return in the film. Completely forgot about that. Yeah, other than that, there's not really too many details on it, on the script, outside of like some speculation in Jean Lemaire's book that some of the actual structure of the screenplay would have been fairly similar to what happens in the final film, at least with like some of the pacing with when the battle sequences are placed in the script between like Gamera and the ice giant, and the final film with Gamera and the and Barugon, Gamera getting frozen in both scripts apparently in the first fight. Other than that, there isn't really too much else known as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, from what I was able to gather, the story for the Ice Giant script isn't really well known outside of the general plot synopsis.
Yeah, exactly.
But they do theorize that they took a lot of concepts and kind of worked them into other things. Of course, you know, the Ice Giants became their own script, and then that morphed into Daimajin. So some of those ideas and concepts were brought over to that one. But in Barugon,
I mean, of course, it's Daiei. They wanted to bring back Nezura to fight Gamera.
Yeah, and you know, with Barugon, they thought about including the ice aspect, which is why the tongue is the way it is. But if I remember correctly, they also went about it a different way because they wanted to kind of tweak the concepts of like fire and ice, and they wanted to like do, if I remember correctly, it was more like stone and ice, or stone and fire, which is kind of why there's the whole opal thing. I don't really get it. I think if I remember correctly, that's what August Ragone mentioned in his commentary track. But like you said, they even, for years actually, from 1966 all the way up into the 70s, they were trying to get Noriaki Yuasa to reuse the Nezura suit and do a Gamera versus Nezura, because that was just wasted space. But he never could, if I remember correctly, he just never could come up with a story treatment that would make that work, which is why that just never happened. And what's even more interesting, I think, is even in the script we got, you know, the final Barugon script, they were still shifting around and cutting things and moving stuff, like down to even post-production. Like, we didn't even get the script we got.
I definitely heard a bit. I read a bit about Yuasa himself, because he's not the director in this film. He's actually the special effects director instead, because the guy who did the special effects directing on the original Gamera had left Daiei to work in I want to say he founded his own company, if I remember right. And
he was freelancing
on a TV show. Yeah, and he was working on a TV show called Comet-san. And so Yuasa did the special effects for this film. And the point I was going to make was that I know Yuasa was getting mad that a fair bit of the footage that he was shooting was just getting cut.
Right. And even more so than that, like, the entire opening was originally supposed to be one of our characters flying a plane, and they dealt with radio wave interference, which would have been hinting at Gamera returning instead of a whole flashback sequence. And there was a couple other things. There were some comedic elements that they cut entirely from the script, which ended up, well, they didn't cut it from the script. They cut it from the film, which led to jump cuts in some of the drama sequences because they had completely removed some comedic moments that happened in the film. And so it was all an attempt to make it a little more serious. And if I remember correctly, part of Yuasa's problems was the fact that they would change what they were doing So they would have to go back and reshoot the footage because it wouldn't fit what they wanted.
Yeah, I know you also complained a bit about how, like, he would suddenly be told, hey, you have this whole sequence that you've kind of set up for the monsters to appear from this direction. Hey, you have to change it to actually be this. They're coming from the complete other direction because of what we've been doing. And I know he was getting pretty annoyed with that at some point.
And let's not just ignore the fact that Noriaki Yuasa got stripped from his director role in this film, because this is the only Showa Gamera film that he did not direct. And that was because Gamera the Giant Monster ended up doing so well that the president of Daiei wanted to do a sequel. Well, he ended up giving...
to make it an A-level production.
Right. So for the sequel, they ended up giving it 80 million yen, which was twice the amount of the first film.
Yeah, and the highest budget of any of the Showa Gamera films.
And they wanted to bring on an A-list director along with well-known cast members to really bring in the big bucks. So Yuasa got demoted to that effects role because he was the only one at Daiei by this point that really had any idea what he was doing with special effects. Mm-hmm. Which I can imagine was obnoxious to him because Gamera was his child. He loved Gamera.
Yeah. And the director who was given the film was Shigeo Tanaka, who had previously done some other epics for Daiei, such as the Japanese-Taiwanese co-production The Great Wall. Outside of that, I don't have too many significant notes on production that I want to mention at this point until we get into the film. Do you have any left? Or?
Well, I mean, production on the film started in January of 1966. This film got kind of thrown into production fairly quickly after the original film came out, considering the original film
5 months later.
Yeah, the original film came out November 27th, and they ended up getting Barugon into production January 22nd. Now, that was for the special effects unit. They shot the effects between January 22nd and April 5th of 1966. The drama sequences, which with your actual actors and whatnot, that, however, started February 20th of 1966 and ended in April of 1966. That was because the lead actor, Kojiro Hongo, was not wanting to be in the movie. He did not want to do it. So he faked a illness to actually get off of it. And so what ended up happening is they saw that he was sick and they said, oh, we'll just delay the production by a month and we'll just wait for you to get better. And that's what they did. And then he reluctantly got involved with the film and then went on to do the movie. He actually ended up not even looking at the script, really. He just went on set and just kind of did it because he didn't think he would have to because, well, all the monster stuff is not there. So he just figured he could just kind of look off screen and pretend to be shocked and call it a day.
Right.
It's also, we were talking about the production and the amount of films that Daiei was producing at this time that were kaiju based. It's very important to note that the reason they were able to do this was because of the fact that Gamera vs. Barugon was produced by Daiei Tokyo and Daimajin was produced by Daiei Osaka. They are...
Wasn't it Daiei Kyoto?
Or yes, it's Daiei Kyoto. It's Daiei Kyoto for Daimajin, You're right. Same company, two different branches. And they worked on films independently of each other with very little bleed over. It wasn't like Toho, where you had the same people doing everything. They had two different crews basically doing the films. There was like one or two people that would cross over, but that was about it.
I know I read that, I want to say it's the designer, the actual modeler for the Barugon suit. His name was Ryusaku Takayama. He would also do a lot of the suits for Ultraman, like Bemula, Zeton, Red King, etc. Oh, wait, no. He would do a lot of suits for Ultraman, but he worked on both Gamera vs. Barugon and Daimajin, I believe. I want to say he actually sculpted Daimajin and a lot of like the props for the movie as well. So he would end up going like back and forth between where the two studios were located, which led to him, I want to say he wasn't actually able to completely finish everything he wanted to do with the Barugon suit before giving it to X Productions, which is the company of the Yagi brothers, whom, you know, they've worked on a bunch of Toho Kaiju suits and had previously helped out on the first Gamera suit. So they went and did the detailing on the Barugon suit, and I believe they also made the Gamera suit as well for the film. And there were a few other props made, a few other puppets, and like an upper body, an upper body puppet, puppet for Barugon for his ice breath effect.
Now, it is important to note that one of the biggest downfalls Daiei had in terms of their effects department is they didn't have an optical printer. So all of that had to be outsourced. So Toyo Development Laboratories actually was the one that did the optical printing elements of the film, which that's why Gamera shot actual legitimate fire. That's why they used fire extinguishers for Barugon's actual like frost breath. The only thing that was optical was the rainbow effect. And the reason for the fact that was it was because of that. They needed to keep costs low because not only were they paying for it to be done, they had to pay the work because it was outsourced. So it would have cost more to do it outsourced than in-house like Tsuburaya did at Toho.
Right. But credit where credit is due. I'm just going to say it right here. The optical effects and like compositing in this film look fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of them, but like every shot of an optical effect or a composite shot looks absolutely fantastic. Like near seamless.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, before we dive into the actual film, there is one last thing that you've already mentioned, but I also wanted to kind of dive into a little bit more because it's actually interesting. So you brought up, we've already established April 17th, 1966 was the release date, and you already mentioned that was Golden Week, which we know because Golden Week was one of the big marketing pushes for Godzilla -1 to get its box office. They put it back in some theaters. They put it back into some certain formats.
I mean, I already knew what Golden Week was. I already knew about the holiday.
But that is something that a lot of fans in recent time would know through the -1 box office tracking. Now, what's interesting is, so Golden Week runs from April 29th to May 5th, kind of. It's a little different. They kind of fluctuated. It's based off of certain days of the year, not necessarily dates. And more importantly, Golden Week was actually created by Daiei. Daiei created it.
Oh.
It was created by the Daiei president, producer of this film, Masakazu Nagata, in 1951. So this was actually the 15th anniversary of Golden Week. The whole idea behind Golden Week was, after your New Year's box office rush, what else are you going to do? So in 1951, they were producing a film, and it was in competition with Shochiku on another film. And what happened is they released it around this time, and it ended up having one of the largest. It beat the New Year's box office haul and was the largest weekend for them in a long time. Now, to do that, they were marketing it as the Golden Week. He had used it to really kickstart the box office and kind of put a little bit of a marketing spin on it. So he was like, oh, it's Golden Week. Come see this movie. It did very well. And so, miraculously, since then, Golden Week has actually become a popular holiday, and a lot of festivals actually also occur during this time, such as like the Kite Festival, the Hiroshima Flower Festival, and the Hirosaki Sakura Festival. So it's kind of funny to see that Daiei actually invented this, and their 15th anniversary of Golden Week had Gamera versus Barugon and Daimajin, some of their largest IPs, I would imagine, considering the international interest in those two brands. Not a huge interest, but interest nonetheless.
That I actually had no idea that Golden Week was invented by Daiei. That's actually quite interesting.
I didn't know either.
Is there anything else you want to mention before we get into the film? Almost feels like we're breezing through, but hey, I don't mind. The editor, me, doesn't mind.
I don't believe there was anything else really. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find a lot of factoids on production itself. A lot of it's like, oh, this person went on to do this person did that.
Yeah, I definitely wish I had some more resources on this film. I wish I had more resources on this film to actually go deeper in. But hey, there's more here than some other films we've covered at the very least.
See, I was actually kind of surprised because my Daimajin MOOC, it's the Daiei Special Effects Daimajin MOOC, which is actually like one of the biggest sources for Daimajin and a lot of the special effects films because it covers all of them. Didn't have a lot on this one. Pretty much everything we've mentioned is what it covered.
Well, I know there is I know there are MOOCs dedicated to the Gamera films. There's like the Heisei Gamera Perfection. There's definitely some that are dedicated to the Showa Gamera films. I don't know if there's any as like extensive as the Heisei Gamera one, but I'm sure there is more out there. Mm-hmm. And I would love to dig further into it someday, but alas. It is what it is. There's still a decent bit here, at the very least.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But shall we begin?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So our film begins quite nicely with a little recap of the very first Gamera film, Gamera the Giant Monster.
Which wasn't actually supposed to be there. That was something that wasn't even in the original script, like I mentioned. And I think it's kind of obvious that it very much wasn't supposed to be.
I think it fits fine in this. Given we like pretty quickly after like go straight into space.
See,
with
but
an immediate follow up.
My whole thing was with this introduction, not only is the footage they're showing all in black and white, but with the narration and everything, it really kind of felt like it felt very much like a television episode. And I couldn't help but think that kind of made the film feel like its budget wasn't near the amount that it actually was. And I think that's an issue throughout the film. Is there are a lot of moments where it's like, this doesn't feel like this has a bigger budget. But there's also a lot of other aspects of the film that make it feel like it has a bigger budget. So I feel like the film does have a constant tug of war of, hey, we have a good budget here, and hey, we don't have a budget here. Does that make sense?
I guess. See, from this scene, I definitely got the impression that from this opening sequence, I definitely got the impression that the film was bigger than the first Gamera, but I think the Gamera suit in this film looks worse than the original. I don't think it looks as impressive as the original.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be that the suit is just smaller. I think that might be the issue. It just looks less like physically like imposing, and it looks, I don't know if cheaper is the right word for it. but I don't know. It just maybe cheaper is the word. I don't know. But I think the actual look of everything around it is like a step up from the original film otherwise.
I think that the biggest issue is the lighting for the Gamera suit doesn't make it look as imposing, because the lighting, I remember we both actually talked about it, how the lighting and the atmosphere of the Gamera scenes was actually really good. But
see, here's the thing. I actually think the lighting in this film is, for the most part, pretty great. I think it looks fantastic for the most part. Some of them, I have issue in certain scenes with some of the cinematography, but I think in this opening sequence where, spoilers, Gamera escapes from the Plan Z rocket and, thanks to a meteor, and attacks Kurobe Dam in Japan. I think the actual, I think in this scene, the cinematography looks pretty fantastic. One of the later scenes with him, I don't think looks very good. I think there's some very unflattering cinematography and editing, but I think this first scene with him is actually really solid. Yeah,
I really do feel like the flashback doesn't help it. Especially since, we're kind of falling into that. So, as soon as Gamera escapes the Plan Z spaceship, he returns to Earth. And in the dialogue, they mention that he's now stronger. There's a lot of moments where they kind of throw Gamera stuff, and they're just like, "Yep, this is how it is now," which is a little weird.
Did you watch the dub or the sub?
I did sub.
Okay, I don't remember them saying he was stronger. I don't remember them saying that.
in the opening dialogue from the narrator, they mentioned that Gamera is returning stronger.
Yeah, they probably did. I just don't remember that.
And then they don't really explain why, but Gamera just kind of destroys Kurobe Dam. And I was just like, why? There's a lot of moments
he was a villain in the first film, so I think it makes sense that he just continued his rampage. I mean, he was looking for energy from whatever. Like, when he leaves, he's looking for, fire and energy and whatever.
Right. He suddenly just goes to a local nearby volcano.
Yeah, an underground volcano specifically.
But he attacks a dam. I feel like there's a lot of moments in this movie where they just kind of throw stuff at the wall and they're just like, it works. Let's move on.
I don't know. I don't think it's really that big of a deal, except for near the end. There is a bit of a plot convenience near the end, setting up the final fight.
I think there's a ton of plot convenience in this movie.
You'll have to point me to some of them, because some of them, I don't know, not a lot of them really stood out outside of the ending.
Suddenly, there's a volcano that Gamera flees to eat. There's one plot convenience.
I mean, him suddenly going to it, sure, but, it would have existed before.
True. But I'll get into them as we continue on, because as soon as this whole scene ends, we jump to Osaka, which this got pointed out in the bonus features of the Arrow set, and I couldn't help but notice it here. We jump from Kurobe to Osaka, to Kobe to Osaka, and then New Guinea's in there in the middle. It's just a back and forth. There's not really any establishing locations that we constantly go back to. It's just kind of, we're back and forth on these two locations. Occasionally a third one pops in for a brief special effects scene, and then we move on, which I think's a little obnoxious.
Really? I didn't take any issue with the location jumping. I think it works well enough for the film.
But going back to Osaka, we do get introduced to our main character, our side characters, our antagonist, and the plot of the movie with a big question mark next to it, because I think this movie's plot is thinner than a brick, thinner than a piece of fishing lure line. So we get a brief breakdown of what's to happen, which is This group of people are going to New Guinea to find a diamond in a cave to get money and be rich. That's the summary of it, pretty much.
Yeah, simple setup.
So I will say this, during this opening sequence, I couldn't help, or it's not an opening sequence, during these establishing shots, I couldn't help but notice that the film feels a lot like, specifically in the drama scenes, it feels very much like a Yakuza or a drama movie or something else, just how they're framing. It's very obvious Yuasa's not directing.
Even the writer actually mentions that a lot of the drama scenes that he wrote are very similar to a lot of Yakuza films. Nissan Takahashi mentioned that in some interviews.
And I do like that. It makes the film feel more dynamic, but I think, while I say that here, I think that also brings down the other director's works, because here you have some actually good, intricate camera work. The framing is very specific. The lighting is dynamic. There's some really beautiful lighting in this film. The cinematography is great. And then when you jump over to the monster stuff, it's like kind of just there on screen in front of you. There's not a lot of framing going on, and it doesn't really look that great.
Especially in the Osaka sequence.
Yes, the Osaka sequence. This is exactly what I'm referring to as well.
The Osaka fight might genuinely be the worst sequence in the movie. Just putting it out there. Just putting it out there.
Might?
Well, I'm happy to see that's not a controversial opinion. I honestly figured, like, I don't know, I feel like no one talks about that. But then again, I don't listen to reviews on this movie.
I stopped watching reviews on kaiju movies when I started podcasting. But going back into the film, one of the big things on the movie is our main character, played by Kojiro Hongo. He is brought in because his brother in the film, Ichiro, is unable to go to New Guinea due to his injury. So he joins two of Ichiro's friends to go to New Guinea aboard the Awaji Maru. Now, they work on the ship while they're traveling to New Guinea. And then they get to New Guinea, they get on a helicopter, they get dropped down. We get another King Kong sequence. I don't even know if you would say this is King Kong inspired. I don't really think it is.
What, with the natives?
Yes.
No, I just took it as another Japanese kaiju movie with Japanese blackface.
Yeah. I should also bring up that you see a lot of the jump cuts in the establishing shots in the setup, where all of our human characters are talking about going and getting this diamond. There's a lot of jump cuts in there. Now, when we get to the island...
I don't remember noticing too many. I think maybe I noticed like one.
There's like two or three.
I'm like struggling to remember any others, honestly.
There's like two or three, which is enough for me to complain.
I'm struggling to remember there being much in jump cuts.
Now, when they get to the island, they're welcomed by the natives very quickly, but unlike a King Kong or something where they're hostile, they're nice.
Pretty chill.
We also get introduced to Dr. Sato, not that Dr. Sato from last week, a different one, who is there to help treat local diseases. He's been there for years, and he's... Oh,
that's the other doctor. Dr. Sato is on the ship. Matsushita is the doctor on the island.
That's right. Sorry, I forget these characters. They're kind of easy to kind of blend.
There's honestly no reason for Matsushita and Sato to be two separate characters.
There's not even a reason.
Matsushita doesn't contribute anything.
He doesn't. He's in like 3 scenes and he's gone.
Yeah, literally.
So, but he's there to introduce us to Karen, which it's weird. Okay, so we have a character named Karen in New Guinea on an island with natives. She herself is a native, but she speaks Japanese, and when she goes to Japan, suddenly is very much like she's at home.
She also just happens to be the one native with light skin.
See, I noticed that too. I was like, this character just screams plot convenience after plot convenience. Also, she just doesn't work. Like, the way they set her up, her story just does not work.
She's whatever. There's like a little bit of a love interest element with her character and the protagonist Keisuke, but it's like barely a thing in the film. It's kind of just brought up, like it shows up once in the middle and then they're together at the end. That's
Correct.
pretty much all the development it gets.
It's not as bad as Gappa, where they talk about women independence.
No, but that's a very Gappa and like X from Outer Space's love plots are very low bar in terms of being very outdated.
Right. Now, actually, I do think it's important to note that Gappa, I think, is actually a good film to compare Barugon to, simply due to the whole island aspect, the native aspect, being linked to the monster. Obviously, they're different, but I think they're two films you could compare, and it somewhat makes sense.
Yeah.
So, during the whole discussion between Karen, the doctor, and our three people, it's the antagonist. It's the protagonist, antagonist, and side character. We learn about the Valley of Rainbows and how they should not go there, that it is like forbidden to go there. And eventually the antagonist, Onodera, how do you say his name?
Onodera,
decides to just shoot a gun and go. And then we get a 6-minute sequence of them traveling through the jungle, which apparently was a lot longer and had some more obstacles for them to overcome instead of just walking around.
That makes sense. I definitely was surprised how quickly we got through this whole island sequence and finding the opal. I was expecting it to take up more of the film, honestly, than it actually does.
Right, because the only obstacle they come through is quicksand.
The quicksand. And then a little bit with the scorpions.
Which ends up killing one of our side characters.
Yes, Kawajiri. R.I.P.
But I also can't help but think that was when I really started to notice the score. It just did not work.
I thought it was fine. It didn't really do much for me outside of I think there's a couple moments near the end where it actually sounds pretty nice. But for most of this beginning bit of the film, I really didn't notice it.
I noticed it here in the jungle sequence, really. And that's when I just, I wrote down, the music just doesn't fit. It feels too much like it's trying to be like Ultraman, which doesn't make a lot of sense because Ultraman came out after this. But it has maybe Ultra Q, a lot of Ultra Q-isms, and it just feels really upbeat for a serious adult film. Does that make sense?
Maybe. I don't know. I feel like this is kind of just this more or less this general style of music in 60s Japanese films, really.
See, but you say that, but then 70s. Ibra Horror of the Deep, same year, very much Marusu Sato, but on top of that, it fits. It's a little exotic.
I never thought the music in this film really, at least in this early bit, I never found it really didn't stand out much to me. I don't know.
It didn't. That's, I think,
it just sounded fine to me.
I think that's part of the issues. It just doesn't stand out.
Maybe.
I think more so than that, it just doesn't fit. It's not blaringly bad that I notice it, but it's not noticeable. And when you do take time to listen to it, you're okay, this just kind of feels like we're listening to music while we're walking through the jungle here. It just does not fit. I didn't think it fit. And honestly, throughout the film, I just don't think any of the music really works and complements what you're watching.
I just can't agree with that. But yeah. eventually, once they get into the cave, after a little bit of looking, they pretty quickly find the opal. As you mentioned, Kawajiri gets killed by a scorpion, which Onodera just lets happen without any warning.
Right, this was the beginning of establishing that he was the villain.
Right, and then we also contrast this with Keisuke, who's a lot more compassionate, crying over the death of Kawajiri.
And if I remember correctly, now this might have been cut, you can possibly help me here. Doesn't he talk about bringing Kawajiri to Japan to like bury him? Or was that cut?
I want to say no. I want to say he throws that idea around, but Onodera's like, it's not like we could take him. It's not like we can take his body on the ship or something like that. I'm pretty sure Onodera says something about it. I don't remember if Keisuke did.
That sounds right to me. Yeah, and so from there we get kind of this weird moment where Keisuke is just kind of definitely lost in the moment, and they do a switch. They decide that Onodera will have the opal while Keisuke has the gun. And then as Onodera walks out, he uses a grenade and blows up the entire cave. So at this point, we know who our villain is, and we kind of have an idea for what the theme of the film is, which is don't be greedy, which at the time kind of makes sense when you consider Mothra versus Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, which were absolutely a couple years prior, but that was definitely a issue at the time in Japan during the economic boom.
Yeah, and it's a theme that is very much constant throughout this film, especially with the contrast between these two characters, Onodera and Keisuke. Fortunately for Keisuke, he is before he could die, then he is saved by Karen and the other natives, whom after he wakes up explain to him that the jewel will bring chaos, and that Karen decides to join Keisuke in going to Japan to go find it.
Right. While this all happens, Onodera's back on the ship traveling to Japan, but he's also not feeling too well. So he's trying to get treated as Keisuke and Karen are going to Japan as well.
Right. And this is where we meet Dr. Sato, whom helps treat Onodera's athlete foot that he got on the island using an infrared ray, which ends up being the catalyst for our monster's arrival, as during a game of Mahjong where whilst Onodera has left the opal in his jacket, conveniently pointed right in the direction of the infrared ray, it ends up what's revealed later to have speeding. It's revealed later that it ended up speeding up the awakening the monster Barugon.
Which this sequence in the film's probably the best sequence in the entire film.
It's a pretty cool sequence.
I know a lot of people have brought it up as a highlight of just the Showa era in general for Gamera because of how the birth sequence is, and I believe this was also Yuasa's favorite scene in the film, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it's the birth of baby Barugon is pretty solid, and the actual rampage here is like the beginning, like before the fight happens. Like I feel all the kaiju stuff before the fight happens pretty good for the most part. But yeah, as Barugon grows, the ship is evacuated whilst pulling into the port of Kobe, during which Keisuke's brother has also arrived with a buyer for the opal. But Onodera is unable to escape with it because he's lost the jacket. So when he meets up with Hirata, they're forced to lose out on the buyer and just retreat.
Before this whole sequence, though, we do get the whole growing to gigantic size from Barugon that destroys the ship. and causes everybody
and
to
eventually
have to...
goes on a bit of a rampage in the city. I will say, I do like the sequence, but one thing that I cannot stand, Barugon's roar. I can't stand that sound effect.
Actually, I was going to bring this up. Barugon's roar is like two roars that are just kind of sloppily thrown together.
It is. It makes my ears want to bleed out, you know? Like, it is a horrific sound, but in a way where I actively I don't want to hear it. I want to turn it off. It's not a good sound effect. Like, I know a lot of people complain about Gamera's roar kind of being annoying, but nah, this roar is actually legitimately annoying to hear over and over and over again.
I just thought it was boring. Especially one thing I did throughout this rewatch was listening to the sound. I don't know why. Maybe it's because on my short film I was really analyzing and acknowledging sound. But throughout this film, there's actual moments in the film where they just reuse sound effects and it's literally on loop. And I could tell that they had just looped a sound effect because it sounded off, then it went it happened again, and then it happened again. And I couldn't help but think, why is the sound design in this so lacking? And one of the things that I noticed was just how awful the Barugon roar was, especially when you consider that when you listen to it and you put it right next to the Gamera sound, the Gamera roar. The Gamera roar has some bass to it. It has some mids, some lows. It's well designed. It's a well-designed roar that actually goes through and sounds good. When you get to the Barugon sound, it's mono.
It's just a screech. It's a bleeding screech.
And I'm pretty sure it is, like I said, it's mono. I'm pretty sure it is just a mono track. I don't think it's surround. I don't think there's anything there to give it a dynamic sound. There's no reverb. There's no bass. It's very bland. It's like they recorded it on some really old microphones that don't have anything to them. And it's when you have the two fighting, it doesn't work because you have the Gamera roar, which is overpowering Barugon, which is supposed to be the villain monster that's going to give Gamera a run for his money. Mm-hmm. And during just the whole dynamic between Barugon and Gamera, to me, just doesn't work. I think there's some obvious issues in the contrast between the two characters that this film just cannot escape because of the obvious time they put rushing Barugon into being real. You know, Gamera they had a basis for. Gamera, they knew what they were going to do. They made a cheaper suit and they did it. They already had the roar. They already knew what they were doing. Barugon they had to create from scratch. It's very obvious they rushed Barugon out as a character, which makes sense to why Barugon is the only Gamera monster to clearly rip off a Toho kaiju.
I mean, it's also unfortunate, Barugon is probably one of the more boring designs of the Showa Gamera kaiju as well.
Even his
when
suit,
you think of,
just look at his suit.
Yeah,
it lacks so much detail.
Yeah, it lacks detail. That is definitely something I really noticed. It's such a plain design, but not in the way some of my favorite Showa kaiju designs are relatively plain. Like you look at Barugon or Gamera, they're fairly plain naturalistic looking animals, but they're still very detailed suits. Whereas this, I don't know, it's just really lackluster by comparison.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree to that. And I think a lot of it comes down to, and I noticed this because there is a huge amount of close-ups. And I noticed that for some reason Noriaki Yuasa really did a lot of close-ups. Probably because he realized he didn't know how to properly scale the suits to make them look big.
There's a lot of wide shots too. The wide shots really stuck out to me because I feel like a lot of them are too mid-level and don't really work a lot of the times.
They don't.
A lot of the wide shots kind of make the monsters look small, not helped by the fact that both of them are typically crawling on all fours, which just makes them look even smaller in the frame.
And when you have nothing in your frame to give it scale, because the unfortunate thing is this film does not know how to do depth. Everything's kind of flat. Like you have this distance between your characters and the camera.
The drama stuff looks great.
I'm not even talking. I'm not addressing to the drama stuff because that's done well. The issue is the effect sequences because, like, as an example, the Osaka sequence, there is a huge gap in front of Gamera and Barugon, specifically around the Osaka castle, right?
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about.
And that creates such a flat image because you have this huge open space in front of the characters behind, like right after you, like where the camera's at, you have this huge just empty space. You have Barugon, and then you have Gamera, and then in the back you have Osaka Castle, which is farther back, which makes it look smaller.
Yeah.
And so you have this very dull, flat image. Plus, like I said, it's very obvious that there's two different directors filming it because there's no interesting camera usage because you have the human sequences, the drama sequences, very interesting framing, dynamic lighting, very important and interesting camera motions. But when you get to the kaiju stuff, it's like, okay, set up camera, put the suits in front of the camera, we have it on a set, go at it.
Well, okay, with the lighting, I don't know if this was intentional, but I actually think there is something kind of a cool effect, pun not intended actually, with the Osaka sequence is that when Barugon appeared, most of the film is fairly like colorful, and like Gamera's first appearance is very colorful, but Barugon, a kaiju that, you know, essentially he has like this purple, like almost like a kind of similar to Ghidorah in King of the Monsters. He has like this storm that like is freezing like everything around him in like 20-foot radius, and then also he obviously has his ice breath tongue, and so like during the Osaka sequence and like a lot of this initial rampage, it's like you see all the color in like the world just like disappear. And I think it's a really cool detail that really works and does help to make the fights seem a bit more dramatic. But the overall cinematography in the editing of the fight in Osaka is awful. But I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Now, going back into the film where we were at, we have Barugon, which has destroyed the ship. Onodera is now talking to Ichiro, telling him that the other two died in New Guinea, and the Chinese buyer says he has to have the opal before he gives the money. So they got a plan to go find it on the ocean floor and get it. Mm-hmm. Because of Barugon, that kind of foils their plans of going at that moment. So Onodera and Ichiro go back to Ichiro's apartment. This is where we get actually a pretty violent fight between Ichiro's wife, and Onodera that ends in both of them dying.
Yeah, because they both get knocked out. Well, his wife gets knocked out, and Hirata gets stuck under like some lockers, I want to say, if I remember right.
It is lockers.
Yeah. And they die in a fire just before Barugon appears in the city.
Yeah, and honestly, going back to understanding what Daiei wanted to do with Barugon and understanding that they wanted this to be a more adult film, that suddenly gives the context of pinning Ichiro and knocking out his wife in this very physical fight. It makes sense.
I mean,
why
was
they
it
would do that.
Daiei that necessarily wanted this to be more adult? Because from what I read from an interview with Takahashi, the writer, was that Daiei kind of just gave him free reign with the script. So like they really didn't request any like tonal shift in the film or to make the film more adult. That's just, according to him, that's basic. He just wrote it like that, and they just trusted him on it, essentially.
See, I could have swore I heard that it was something that the president of Daiei wanted to do. They didn't want to do the whole, here's a kid, like make Gamera a kid character. They wanted to go the route
I don't know
of serious.
But that's just what Takahashi said in an interview.
Gotcha. But nonetheless, it is an interesting sequence when you understand the whole thought process of this is a more serious film. But after this, we jump over to Keisuke and Karen, who are now in Japan, and they learn about Barugon that's now on the loose, and she realizes that it's too late. The opal's hatched, and they have to figure out how to take care of Barugon.
Yeah, but around this time, we also get at about the halfway mark, we finally get the reappearance of our main man, Gamera.
But before all of that, we also get more drama between Onodera, Keisuke, and Karen, who all are interacting with each other. Because Gamera doesn't show up until a little bit later, because we haven't seen Barugon's rainbow attack yet, which that's when Gamera appears again.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So we get this back and forth between Onodera, Keisuke, and Karen, who are in a bar, and they attack each other. And then Keisuke and
Which,
Karen...
I'm just going to say, this scene is the best fight in the movie.
I agree.
This fight between Keisuke and Onodera is actually, like, with, like, these human fights in a lot of, like, the Showa era kaiju films, a lot of them have pretty sloppy choreography and aren't really shot too well. It's usually like only, there's not a lot of coverage. It's like one, like either a static shot or like a shot that just lasts way too long and it ends up being kind of awkward. But this fight is legitimately well choreographed and well edited. Like it's a pretty, just a well done fight, and there's good use of like the environment around them as well.
Right.
It's good stuff.
I think honestly
it's better than any of the Gamera fights in the film.
And that point right there, what you just said, I think is the biggest problem that this film has. The drama sequences outshine every single kaiju moment in this film, because you have a more seasoned director doing all of that. And I think that really hammers home the reason and the idea that Ishiro Honda and Eiji Tsuburaya were a match made in heaven. The fact that you had two seasoned directors working together on two separate teams, putting stuff together that honestly doesn't really look all that different. Like, it's consistent. It's not obvious to see, oh, this is the Tsuburaya stuff, this is the Honda stuff. There's none of that. It's very seamless. Whereas in Gamera versus Barugon, it's very obvious that you have a seasoned director handling your drama stuff and a director that is still very early in his career doing your kaiju stuff because of how drastic they look.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point.
That was honestly at the end of after watching both of my viewings of this, that's what I kind of realized was, wait a minute.
But that is actually something I noticed, because there's a later sequence in the film when our characters are trying to lure Barugon into the sea. And I felt like there was that sequence. It's a great like scene concept, but Barugon, there was no tension with Barugon's following the characters. Even when like the car stalls and Barugon's still being lured, I never felt there was any tension until the human character Onodera shows up at the end of the sequence. And that's when the sequence gets interesting.
I'd also say it's partially due to the lacking score that I said from before.
I don't know if it's, I don't know. I wouldn't complain about the score. I actually, again, I think the score's like at worst, it's fine. But what I took issue with was more just the editing, of this, honestly, was just very lackluster, and probably some of the cinematography too. Definitely in the Osaka fight.
Which we haven't even gotten to yet. We keep complaining, but we're not even there yet.
It's just genuinely a bad sequence. I'm sorry.
It is. No, so
I
actually,
like kaiju fights, but it sucks.
we're actually pretty much there because Keisuke and Karen leave Onodera tied up at a bar, and then they get with the Japan Self-Defense Force somehow. I never really understood how they were like suddenly in.
Yeah, they just are. Which honestly, I don't care enough. I'm fine with that. It's like whatever. I guess they probably like, oh, we have information. And it's like cool.
It's one of those
nice to show that.
Yes,
but I'm like whatever on it. Like
right,
I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Like I get like it's a whole thing about having somebody bombard into a meeting and say, I know something, and then they let them in, without really being like, wait a minute, you could be like a spy, or maybe you could kill us. Like they just let them in, which I get's not realistic, but that's better than just they're there. It feels like we've skipped a step. And honestly, I think that's something that this film very much has an issue with, is I feel like there's a lot of steps that were skipped in the story, in the plot. We already talked about the jungle sequence, how it felt like they just kind of got there. You know, Keisuke and Karen just got to the Japan Self-Defense Force. Gamera just got to Osaka. And bear in mind, we're about 46-ish minutes into the film by now, and Gamera's only been in it for about 4 minutes.
About 50-ish minutes in.
Well, Gamera first appears. I actually wrote it down here because I was really baffled. Gamera
shows appears up like 3 times in the film.
52 minutes in is when Gamera shows up.
Right. For his second appearance.
Correct. And I even wrote down in my notes somewhere in here was, where is Gamera? Like, I get it, we have to introduce Barugon. I'm fine with that. I don't really care about not having screen time. But Gamera shows up and then is irrelevant, and then shows up and then is irrelevant until they remember that he's a thing, and then he shows up and then it's over. It's not like Gamera has this like boding presence of like, oh crap, we have Gamera on the loose, and now here's another monster. It's, oh, we have this monster loose. Oh, there's Gamera. He's alive. We forgot. And it's like, that's how they approach it. And it's like, that's not how you do it.
I don't know. I just didn't really take issue with that too much. Like, I don't know. It's just this whole new threat. It would be probably nice to get have a bit more of presence for, you know, the titular character, but I don't know. I didn't take issue with it. I
just couldn't help but think that I felt like I wasn't watching a Gamera movie for most of the movie. Also, the issue with the lack of Gamera, I think mostly comes because during the whole sequence of, you know, once Onodera gets back to Japan, and Karen and Keisuke come back to Japan, and we get Ichiro and all that, I kind of realized, wait a minute, none of these characters really have much of a reason to be here. Like, you could kill off any of these characters, and the plot would not be really changed outside of Karen. And Karen's only, like, thing to the plot is the fact that she provides the diamond. Onodera could honestly be removed, and you wouldn't have that big of a change.
Don't kill Onodera. He's the best character in the movie. He's the best Showa Gamera character.
I didn't think so. I thought that all these...
He's great. He's great. He's the best part. He's actually the best part of this movie.
I thought all these characters were just bland. I was like, I don't care about any of them.
Onodera is so easy to hate. I love this guy. you hate him so, like, the film gets you to hate him so quickly, just like from as soon as like they're on the island and he's shooting at and he's firing off warning shots at the natives, letting Kawajiri die, and just being a scheming, greedy guy throughout. Like, I think it's not like a like terribly complex character, but it just works. And you know, I don't know, I always thought he was fun, and his scenes provided the most tension in the film and were the most thrilling parts.
See, I just thought he was so kind of bland. Like,
I just completely disagree.
I feel like there's so many other characters in just the Showa Kaiju Eiga boom that
I honestly think he's one of my favorite human villains in like the Showa Kaiju films. Like, he's just really easy to hate.
See, I think he's just very forgettable.
That's crazy to me, because he's like the one Showa Gamera character I've actually remembered over the years, outside of Kenny's.
See, I don't. He doesn't really do anything for me. He's just kind of there. Like, a better character than Onodera is the villain of Mothra versus Godzilla that does the same thing. He double crosses all of the people he works with. He ends up killing people, and he steals money, and he ends up getting killed by the bad monster.
Like, I don't know. I just think I think Onodera just does more for me, honestly.
I think he's... I cannot see where you're coming from here. You are crazy.
I think you're crazy. I think you're insane.
No, he's way too bland.
Go see a doctor.
Well, I would, but the doctor died because Barugon killed him.
No, he didn't.
He was
Dr.
on the
Sato
boat.
lives. No, he escaped. He shows up later.
Let's kill him because he
helps the military.
None of these characters make that. Not all these these characters are basically nameless faces.
I mean, like, I'll agree. Like, Keisuke is pretty bland. He's meant to sort of be like a contrast to Onodera as a more compassionate character, but he doesn't really do much for me. The most interesting thing about him is that he's played by Kojiro Hongo.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there on him. I agree with there. The best thing about Karen is the fact that you realize it's an American name from a villager in New Guinea that knows how to speak Japanese and looks like she's Japanese.
Yeah.
It's great.
You know,
it's great.
You know, just so the audience can relate to her. You know, that's why she's not in Japanese blackface. That, like, 100%, that's got to be the reason.
Mm-hmm. What sucks is you have characters like Kumi Mizuno in Ibra, who I think does a way better job at pulling off the Islander character and just provides more to the plot without removing the Islander aspect. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I really like Onodera, but Karen and Keisuke Karen just kind of does nothing for me outside of just being there for the plot, really. She's just there to be exposition for the characters and to be able to help them just to tell them how to defeat Barugon, pretty much. That's all she's really there for, which, you know, for that she serves her purpose fine, but just isn't really interesting outside of that.
See, and honestly, I think that's my big thing about all the characters in this film is it feels like all of these characters are here to serve the plot as we're getting you to the monster fighting sequences, and then when we have to cut those out, we go back to the monster fighting sequence, or we go back to our characters just pushing out more exposition, getting to the next monster fight. That's what I felt like all of them are.
For what it's worth, I felt like the exposition with the characters was more compelling than the monster fight, so take that for what you will.
I would agree with that. And this was another thing I noticed. They even brought back the narrator for the monster fights to explain what was happening, to give more exposition. Like, they are too busy telling you what's going on that they don't show you. And when they do show you, they feel the need to tell you as well.
I did notice, yeah, like sometimes the film will just explain things and then it'll show you what like Karen has just like, or Keisuke has suggested for like a plan that the military should do. They'll show you the military following through with that plan, and then they'll have the narrator explain it again.
And I couldn't help but think, why are we using a narrator? We don't need... Honestly, there is no need for a narrator in this movie. There is no need.
Yeah.
I think the opening recap, I get the thought process behind it if you forgot or didn't watch Gamera the Giant Monster.
I think it's fine for the recap, but the rest of the film, I think it's really superfluous. Like, you could cut it and the film would not be hurt by it.
I chuckled really hard when I heard the narrator show up again in Osaka. I was like, oh my god. But speaking of Osaka, Barugon is in Osaka, and the JSDF attempts to kill Barugon, which is where we then see Barugon's rainbow power, which will never not be funny. But I did want to bring up this. They do utilize a couple of crane shots during the kaiju sequences, which I think are really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree with the thought that there's some really good lighting in scenes with Barugon, specifically solo. And I get the thought process about the whole freezing everything and making it look black and white-ish. But I also think it just looks really bland, especially when there's no color.
I do agree with that. I think it's like one of those things where it's a cool idea, but it doesn't help in making the fight interesting to look at.
The execution is poor. Great idea.
Mm-hmm.
If you had more...
I will say, one thing that is really well executed is a shot of Barugon passing by this house where you can see the silhouettes of people inside running about, and then as Barugon passes, the house freezes over. Brilliant effect.
Yeah,
looks fantastic, near seamless.
I actually noticed that there's actually some really good details. Like, if you look in the background and, like, there's some lit up signs on buildings, and you can see inside some of the buildings, like you said. There's some really good minor details in these shots. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
like, generally the effects, like, ignoring the actual cinematography and the under-detailed suits, the miniature work is really solid in this film. And the compositing, like we said before, looks great. And the lighting when it's at its best adds a lot. Yeah.
I think this film easily has some of the best lighting in a Showa kaiju movie.
Yeah.
And I think its drama scenes have some great cinematography, but it's when you get to the kaiju stuff where I think that starts to crumble.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I think for me, one of the other things that I didn't like is, as we're getting up to it, Gamera shows up. But it also just really feels like they Deus Ex Machina Gamera here. Like, Gamera just shows up due to the heat. Like, it sounds like they're just... Like, here's the thing I don't understand. Barugon freezes things, but his rainbow...
it's the rainbow that attracts Gamera, which I'm fine with. Gamera's looking for energy. It makes enough sense for me.
I don't know. It just kind of felt like it was a real left-fielded throw.
I disagree. I think it makes enough sense.
But speaking of making enough sense, that's not what the fight is. It just kind of is there. Honestly,
it's slow. It's
a Heisei fight before the Heisei fights existed.
There's nothing really interesting going, especially in the first half of the fight. nothing really interesting is going on in the choreography.
Mm-mm.
I think it's got a cool idea of like Barugon like freezing Gamera. That's cool.
That's about it.
Barugon bleeds. That's cool. That's about the extent of my praise for this fight.
See, I actually wondered during the whole fight, I was like, they're in Osaka right now, and we have a monster on 2 feet fighting a 4-legged monster in its second outing. I was like, wait a minute. We've seen this before. And I thought back to Godzilla Raids Again.
Yeah, but like with Raids Again, there's actual, partially due to the error with the way it was filmed, but there's actual energy in how that fight is shot and edited as well, that this fight just completely lacks in how slow it is.
So part of me was like, is this what would have happened if Raids Again had been done properly? Like if they had...
I think Raids Again's fight still would be more exciting.
I agree. I was kind of honestly, there too, because
this is a lot of the beginning part of this fight is a lot of Gamera and Barugon roaring at each other from a distance, and like almost seemingly like trying to bait each other into the fight. And then there's just a bit of it of like Barugon running around as Gamera like slowly like shoots fire in his general direction. Right. And then there's a pretty lame beam clash.
Yeah, this is definitely a Heisei fight before they existed. I was not a huge fan of the Osaka fight. I actually put in my notes, the Osaka fight is lame.
It's bad.
Just lame.
It's pretty bad. Like, it is genuinely really underwhelming.
And see, I guess this is a good moment to bring up, because we are about an hour into a hour and 40-minute movie. By the way, this movie's almost 2 hours long. You could cut out so much of this movie. Like, I think you could cut out about 20 minutes of this movie and, like,
just the AITV agreed with you.
They did. Thank God they did. It feels like there's a lot of moments in this movie that are just not moving fast. But what I was going to get to here is I really think that Gamera versus Barugon, it's funny. When you look at the reviews for this, not at the time, but like when you look at people's, retrospectives and, oh, I recently rewatched it, or hey, I'm watching it for the first time, here's my thoughts on YouTube. A lot of it's really positive for this movie, mostly praising the serious nature of the film. I can't help but think that this film just lacks a lot of energy. And while I would agree that on a framing and cinematography field of critiques, this movie does a really good job on the drama stuff. But I can't help but think this seems like one of the most boring Gamera movies out there.
See, I completely disagree with that. I think this is more entertaining than any of the other Showa Gamera films. I think the rest of them are boring. I think they're boring as hell. I do think the kaiju stuff in this is pretty boring, but I think the drama stuff is pretty solid. Like, I was shocked how quickly this film went by for me. I looked, like, the one scene that I remembered on my first watch, I thought, man, this was a drag, is the scene near the end where they are luring Barugon into Lake Biwa with the diamond. I remember thinking that was a drag, and it definitely kind of still is when the tension is with Barugon chasing them. But I was actually shocked when I realized I was like, wow, I'm already an hour 20. There's only 15 minutes left. I was like, whoa, this has gone by really quick. I genuinely wouldn't say I was bored with this watch. This is actually like, it was a really quick and breezy watch for me. I was genuinely shocked. how quick it felt.
See, and to me, it felt like this was a film that took forever.
That's crazy. That's how I feel about most of the other Showa Gamera films.
I couldn't help but think the other Showa Gamera films have more entertainment and more energy to them.
What?
Yeah.
No, I disagree.
Granted,
I can't agree
I will
with
say
that
this.
in any capacity.
I will say this. Zegra, Jiger, and Super Monster aren't included in that.
Actually, I think Jiger is one of the more entertaining Showa Gamera films. I think the first half of it is really solid. Second half, first half, solid.
I don't have that good of a memory of it, but I don't remember liking it. I could be wrong. I need to rewatch it.
I remember the first half being pretty like breezy. It's just the second half where it kind of loses steam. But no, this film I thought was actually like fairly well paced. I genuinely, it was just a breeze for me. A breeze to watch. I had no issue. Previously I had issue, but this time I actually thought it worked a lot better.
I think this is one of the rare occurrences where
rare cases where we completely disagree.
Yeah, I think this is going to be one where by the end of it, we're going to be like, yeah, we don't agree on hardly any of this. The only thing so far I think we really
agree on is the kaiju stuff is kind of lackluster.
And that the human cinematography is really good and the lighting is just good.
Yeah.
Speaking of the kaiju stuff, Barugon kind of wanders off after Gamera's been frozen.
Yeah, he just goes on continuing his little rampage as the military tries to think up of some ways to combat him.
And this is where we get the whole Barugon doesn't like water thing.
Mm-hmm. Which is foreshadowed earlier on.
A little bit. Oh, also, they do name drop the atomic bomb in this movie, which I thought was very interesting. And I think it really showcases how Noriaki Yuasa was a young director at the time, because in his films, you would not see that idea of you have Japanese in like bunkers, which is they're in the subway, as the monsters are on top and they name drop the atomic bomb. Yuasa would have never done that. Yuasa would have never done that because that wasn't something he would have known of.
Right, but Shigeo Tanaka was an older director. He was like about 20 years older, I want to say.
Yeah. So I thought that was really cool. I think that was one of the defining moments of like, oh yeah, this is not a Yuasa film. Which I think does make Gamera versus Barugon stand out. I think in general, Gamera versus Barugon stands out for better and for worse.
For better.
Because I think this film on a camera, like talking about the cinematography, this is easily the best Showa Gamera film. The cinematography in this film in general is just better.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the script, this is very much lacking in that regard.
God, I cannot disagree more. Oh my God, I think most of the Gamera films are really lacking in their scripts. I think this is Takahashi's most interesting Gamera script and most engaging.
See, I have a better memory of Guiron.
No, I can barely remember. No, I did not enjoy Guiron. I did not enjoy Guiron. I think the Showa Gamera films, it's like, to me, the good ones are Barugon, Gyaos, the first, and Jiger are not terrible. And then there's everything else is garbage.
I'm really curious to see how our Gamera films turn out. Maybe we won't be friends by the end. Well, no, what will happen is we won't be friends, and then we'll come together for Zegra and Super Monster. Those are our Avengers level threats right there, those two things.
Oh, boy. Yeah, especially Super Monster.
We should get back to the film we're talking about, though.
That's so true, though. What was even happening in the film last we mentioned?
Well, they're talking about how Barugon has the weakness of water, and they're talking about luring
that's
him
right.
with the diamond.
Yeah, they try and fail with the diamond that Karen brings, but eventually they realize that because Barugon has grown due to the infrared ray and radiation from it, he's grown far bigger than he typically should. So they're going to need to make the diamond more brilliant. So they decide to use this conveniently already created ruby death ray to increase the diamond's brilliance. You know, saying that aloud, I kind of realize what you mean about some of the plot conveniences.
Thank you.
Okay, it didn't stand out too much to me when I was watching the film, but actually, like, recapping that now, I'm like, wow, that really wasn't set up at all prior.
And you know what's funny? It works. Just so happens it works. And they lure Barugon. And then this is where we get Onodera's death as he's trying to get the diamond.
Yeah. Because he's giving up on the opal at this point.
Yeah, which I really love his death. I will say his death, the fact that it's direct, like you see him die and he directly interacts with Barugon, I thought was really cool.
Awesome. And the effect looks great.
I agree.
There is one thing about the scene that bothers me, though.
What is it?
The military guys are completely useless.
I mean, the military's been useless this entire time.
No, but they don't do anything to try and stop Onodera.
Oh, that's
there's like two guards with guns on the boat or on the jeep or whatever they're driving, and just this random. I mean, I guess Onodera is like. I think it's implied he's a war veteran.
Yes,
but they don't try anything. They don't try. They don't point their guns at him or anything, even though he's like literally climbing up the ship. Like, do something. You know,
right? He does shoot one of the military guys, but there's still enough to like easily, I think, take him down. Like, considering the fact there's like 4 or 5 people against one, and 2 of them have guns. Like, I feel like there's no way that wouldn't like work. Plot convenience, though, right? But he does. Onodera does get the diamond, but then Barugon grabs him, and then that's when he dies. Which I like. I will say this. I do like the fact that they kind of throw this, oh crap, what do we do now? And then Gamera shows up. You know.
Well, no, they after this sequence they come up with a whole nother plan to defeat Barugon first.
Right, they find out that
with a reflector dish.
Yeah, a mirror can reflect his rainbow.
Which, you know, this is kind of where we kind of established that formula of the military's got to have a couple goes at the monsters before we can have our final battle with Gamera.
Right, honestly, the more we talk about this, the more I realize that when Monster X Strikes Back was riffing the Showa Kaiju movies, I'm starting to wonder if it was like the Gamera franchise very specifically.
Yeah, especially with this whole military coming up with a bunch of plans, because like in the Gamera films, they like I definitely remember in like Gyaos. I don't remember the other ones as clearly if they really contribute as much, but in this film in Gyaos, I wouldn't quite say it's downright wasting time, but the military's efforts don't really end up contributing a whole lot.
I don't remember
of how much time we spend with it. You know?
I don't remember the military being relevant in Super Monsters, Zigra, Guiron, Viras. I don't remember them being relevant.
Yeah, I don't remember. I genuinely don't remember those films well enough.
I don't remember Jiger and Gyaos good enough.
No, Gyaos, they definitely come up with a few plans, because there's a scene where they get Gyaos on like the spinny thing.
Oh, that's right. See, I know Guiron because they're not even on Earth to really do anything.
True. I don't know. We'll have to find out.
But the mirror does work, but Barugon very quickly realizes their plan and just stops using the rainbow.
Yeah.
Which, now we're just kind of stuck. Like, they can't really do a lot to kill Barugon. They can't get him into the water. he's just kind of there, and they don't really like. It's like, well, what do we do now?
We wait on a plot convenience. That's what we do.
Gamera shows up.
Yeah. Osaka, finally, the ice just starts falling, and Gamera, shows up, and we have our final battle.
Which, again, pretty lame, but I think the final battle's better.
It's an improvement. It's an improvement. The choreography is a little more interesting here. There's a lot more actual Gamera and Barugon actually interact with each other more. It's a bit Gamera tries biting him a bit more. They actually use the environment. Gamera in particular, throws him around into like the bridge, I want to say it was, that he throws him into.
Yes.
And then obviously he drags him into the water to kill him off.
Right. Which I thought was really great. Good. I love that idea.
It's not a great fight, but it's a massive improvement over the previous one, which was just genuinely one of the most lackluster fights I've seen in a while from this genre.
And honestly, seeing Gamera like grab Barugon and seeing Barugon just shower itself with blood, I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I love kind of the whole the animalistic nature of this final fight. It works really well here, much like how in Godzilla Raids Again, the animalistic fight in Osaka works. Does that make sense? Nonetheless, Barugon gets killed, and then we get our love story between Keisuke and Karen, and they decide to go back to New Guinea.
Yeah.
And then we get an end credits crawl. I was kind of surprised by that, were you?
Honestly, it didn't even register with me until you said it just now. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Because normally it's all opening credits.
That is a bit uncommon.
Yeah.
It's usually just opening credits and then the end.
Yeah, I was really surprised by that.
Damn, maybe I've been watching too many modern movies recently.
I think you have.
Damn.
Now, I mean, that's really all I have. Do we want to kind of transition into post-release information?
Sure.
And then overall
go right ahead.
Thoughts?
Yeah.
Well, so I've kind of got conflicting reports, so maybe you can help me here. So Barugon was successful, but it did not do as well as it was supposed to.
Yeah. I think August Ragone claimed that it bombed in his introduction, but from what I can tell, it generally did fairly all right at worst. It's just that it was also really expensive, given it was given the double the budget of the first film. So I presume they just were looking for a more significant box office given that budget increase, I suppose.
Like a top 5 for the year. Something big, kind of like Toho level.
Something like that, I suppose.
Another interesting factoid is unlike Gamera the Giant Monster, Barugon never saw theatrical screens in the West. Daiei commissioned a dub for the film because they expected it to get a theatrical release, much like Gamera the Giant Monster did. But when it eventually came over to the West, it was AITV that acquired it, and it was only shown on television. And then eventually
and that international dub wouldn't come out until a few, I want to say a decade or so later?
It was when Mystery Science Theater 3000 showed it. That's when we got
wasn't it when Sandy Frank released it on VHS? Yeah.
Well, no, because MST3K happened before the...
Oh, did it?
Yes.
Oh.
It was shown... It was shown on its... when it was a local TV show, and then when it went nationwide, it got shown again. I'm pretty sure for both they used the Sandy Frank dubs as they've been labeled.
Yeah, I mean, those Sandy Frank dubs are pretty infamous, partially due to those MST3K episodes.
Yes. So, yeah, that's really all I have. It seems like I said, Barugon actually has a pretty positive following. For me, however, I just didn't get that vibe from it.
Yeah, and I still find that crazy.
Well, see, here's the thing. I really think Gamera vs. Barugon is a very colorful, ambitious sequel, especially when you consider, for me at least, Gamera the Giant Monster is pretty lacking in dull film, all things considered. And I would say this is one of the rare instances where a sequel proves to be better than its predecessor. I think the film showcases great color, great cinematography, great use of like camera motion using cranes and whatnot. I think that's very good. It's visually interesting. However, I really can't stand the contrast between effects and drama sequences. And I really do want to like this movie, but that's the story does not really fit for me. It's a little too bland. And I really question like the budget here. Not like I don't believe it, but it really doesn't feel like it was a huge step up from the previous film. And I really don't think they knew what to do with these characters. Like, I feel like these characters are just kind of there doing a lot of nothing. And then they do a little bit of something, and then they expose more exposition, and then they do a lot of nothing, and then they just repeat the cycle.
God, I agree a little bit with the human characters. It's a fairly sizable cast with a lot of fairly superfluous roles and a lot of pretty unnecessary characters who, quite a few of whom you could just combine together and it really wouldn't make any difference to the film. But at the end of the day, I really think this is one of the most engaging of the Showa Gamera films. I think this is a really, really engaging script. Like, yeah, like it has plot conveniences, but none of them particularly bother me too much. The actual visual presentation of the film is in the drama scenes, obviously a massive step up. The effects scenes in the fight, I think, are, like we said, very lackluster. But in the solo scene at the beginning with Gamera and a good chunk of Barugon's rampage, I think look great. And there's some genuinely really impressive effects that in some regards, I'm not even entirely sure how they did like the silhouettes in the building for, that one scene where Barugon's passing through. I don't know if it was like if they had like some sort of lighting setup or whatnot. I'm genuinely not entirely sure how they did that. And I think there's little moments like that are legitimately really impressive alongside some of like the compositing and a couple beautiful matte paintings as well in the film. So I don't know. And overall I thought it was really entertaining and it definitely has moments that go on too long in the kaiju action without being all that tense. But yeah, I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed it and had a really, really good time. I was pleasantly surprised to find I actually enjoyed it more than my previous watch.
I'm glad you got that. I'm glad. I'm happy you got to enjoy this movie.
It was a joy. It was a legitimate joy. And I don't think we'll go up from here until we get to Heisei.
We'll see.
I hope to be proven wrong, but I have my doubts.
So, Rex, are you ready for the casting crew?
Of course.
All right, so you've got Kojiro Hongo as Keisuke Hirata, who was also in The Whale God, Daimajin, Gamera vs. Gyaos, Gamera vs. Viras, along with Ghost and Gamera Guardian of the Universe. Kyoko Inami, who played Karen, was in The Whale God, Curse, Death, and Spirit, Dogura Magura, and Why Don't You Play in Hell. Yuzo Hayakawa, who played Kawajiri, was in Robot Detective, Sukeban Deka, Special Police Wingspector, Jetman, Shoryuki Sentai Odoranger, Warning from Space, Daimajin Strikes Back, Ghost Story, The Whole Falls, and Submersion of Japan. Koji Fujiyama played Onodera. He was in The Whale God, Gamera the Giant Monster, Daimajin, Gamera vs. Viras, Gamera vs. Zigra, Female Prisoner Scorpion 701, and Wolf Guy. Takuya Fujioka played Dr. Sato. Akira Natsuki played Ichiro Hirata, was in Messenger from the Moon, Warning from Space, Wind Speed 75 kilometers, Gamera vs. Gyaos, Gamera vs. Viras, Ghost Story, The Whole Falls, The Great Zubat, and Ghost Hot Springs. Yoshiro Kitahara played Professor Amano, was in The Invisible Man vs. the Human Fly, Buddha, Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera vs. Gyaos, Gamera vs. Viras, Ghost Story, Yukijoro, The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch, Japanese Ghost Story Theater, Kamen Rider X, Kamen Rider Amazon, Android Kikaida, Go Robocon, Secret Sentai Go Ranger, and Ultraman 80. And then Ichiro Sugai played Dr. Matsushita, was in Messenger from the Moon, the 1934 version, and the 1949 version. For your crew, you've got Masakazu Nagata, the producer, who worked on The Whale God, Gamera the Giant Monster, Daimajin, The Wrath of Daimajin, Ghost Story, The Haunted Cave, Gamera vs. Vieras, The Yukiona, The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch, The Tokaido Road, The Yotsuya Kaidan, The Ghost of Oiwa, Ghost Story, The Deep End, Gamera vs. Jiger, The Witch, and Spook Warfare. Nissan Takahashi, your writer, worked on Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera vs. Gyaos, Gamera vs. Viras, Gamera vs. Guiron, Gamera vs. Jiger, Gamera vs. Zigra, Gamera Super Monster, Thunder Mask, Electric Man Zamborgar, and wrote the book Gamera vs. Phoenix. Tadashi Kinoshita, your composer, worked on all 3 Human Condition films. Your director of special effects was Noriaki Yuasa, who worked on Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera vs. Gyaos, Gamera vs. Viras, Gamera vs. Guiron, Gamera vs. Jiger, Gamera vs. Zigra, Gamera Super Monster, The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch, Electric Man Zamborgar, and Ultraman 80. And your director was Shego Tanaka, who did not work on any tokusatsu outside of this. And that is your casting crew. So, obviously, this is the first film in our month, so we don't really have a ranking for our themed month. Gamera vs. Barugon's our number 1 and our number 0.
Wonder if it'll stay there.
But we can rank it with the other Gamera film we've covered, Gamera the Giant Monster.
I think we might agree on at least this one. At least for now, I think we'll agree.
I think we will agree on our ranking of our 2 Gamera films.
Yeah.
So our least favorite Gamera film so far?
That is what I just said. Gamera the Giant Monster.
And the best one's Gamera versus Barugon so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Good movie.
It's okay.
Yeah, but you need to go see a doctor. So, that's all I'm saying.
Well, I will say, with that, I'm out of things to say. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I've pretty much said my piece, gone through, as far as I can tell, all my notes.
Well, all I have left to say is hello. I'm Elijah, and I have a kaiju and tokusatsu problem. Joking aside, I am Elijah Thomas. I am part of the rotating hosts for Monsters with Attitude. You can check us out on YouTube, where we do monthly live streams talking kaiju entertainment. You can also head over to Facebook and join our Facebook group. It's a great place to talk with like-minded people. I'm also a writer. I've written for GodzillaMovies.com and in Kaiju Ramen Magazine. Currently, I write for Kaiju United. My writing has also been featured in the book Giant Bug Cinema, a Monster Kid's Guide from Bear Manor Media, where I wrote about Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. Outside of writing and podcasting, I have also served as a consultant on the upcoming Titanic Creations officially licensed Yongari articulated figure. You can order it as of the time of this recording. Pre-orders will be shut down. TitanicCreations.com/Yongari. We will have the final count. We will know what our Kickstarters are. But stay tuned because there will be extras to purchase. Just keep an eye out.
Ooh, good to know.
I've also had the privilege to produce bonus features for SRS Cinema. I've worked on Yuzo, The Biggest Battle in Tokyo, Liverleaf, and the upcoming Blu-ray for War of the Ninja Monsters, Jiran vs. Gora. I also did an audio commentary for Yuzo. You can order all of these Blu-rays on srscinema.com. I'm also a filmmaker and YouTuber. You can check out my stuff on my YouTube channel, ET13 Productions, where you can see some of my short films and my older YouTube videos, along with an ever-growing playlist that features all of my appearances on YouTube. I do plan on getting new videos out eventually, so definitely stay tuned for that. I've also appeared in a kaiju movie, a little-known film called Zillafoot from 2021. I made a brief cameo in the film as Skywatcher number 2. It's got a rating of 3.7 out of 10 on IMDb, so if you want to watch more kaiju, you can also buy that Blu-ray on srscinema.com or the DVD from any major online retailer. Or just simply watch it for free on Tubi with ads, or go buy it on Amazon Prime. You can also check out my action figure photography on my Instagram at et13_productions, and my X, the artist formerly known as Twitter, thanks Danny, at the same handle. Now Rex, where can people find you at?
Well, dear listeners, you can find me on YouTube at Rexino, on Twitter at Rex_Xenomorph, and on Instagram, Rex_Xeno. And if you want to check out some of my writing, go take a look at the Tokusatsu Network.
And as for the podcast, don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, I don't actually, that's a lie. I use a MacBook to do this podcast, but Rex doesn't use an Apple product, right?
I have an iPhone.
Don't count that. Don't say that. Don't let them know. But you can rate us on Spotify now. To stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, head over to www.kaijuconversation.com to find all of our episodes, social media, news, and updates. Follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, lucky you. You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually we'll have original artwork on there. But until then, you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt or maybe even a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with us, check out our Discord server full of others that have similar interests to you. Recently, there was a discussion about Ultraman Kaiju and specifically Belial, or Belial, or Belial.
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 I don't think anyone calls him Belial.
Some people do. I've heard it.
I don't think that's how Belial is typically pronounced, but...
I've heard Belial. I've heard Belial.
I don't know.
But I've also heard that it's a great community full of great people. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. We sometimes post exclusives to the channel, like bloopers for episodes or minisodes talking about news or other subjects. We also have an interview with Mechagodzilla designer Jared Krzyzewski on the channel, and I definitely butchered his name, so sorry about that. And a huge thanks to Rex for editing all of these episodes and the other content we upload. His links can be found in the description below. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DiManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at Danzilla93_GNP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Grattan Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by following the podcast on Twitter at Giant Monster BS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, we're going to wrap things up here. So thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We are set, we are in debt, there's nothing to sweat. Life's too short now, baby. Kaiju, not too big now, baby. Conversation. His name's Elijah, baby. And also Rex now, baby. We love those kaiju, baby. And you will too now.